There's a huge problem right now brewing in the state of Florida. HOA fees in the southern part of the state are going up at an alarming rate. For some people, as much as 500%. And not only are the HOA fees going up tremendously for a lot of people, but then they're also getting hit with huge assessments. It's sad to say that many of these people are retired and on a limited income that's fixed, and they are not able to do anything else except for try to sell their condos and get out of these properties before it's too late. Even worse for some, after 2020, condos, which were usually a dead option on the real estate markets of Florida, became a hot commodity. As people couldn't afford housing anymore, they started looking at condos as an affordable option. If you guys remember, I warned people about buying these affordable condos in Florida. Now people that bought these overpriced condos, before 2020, you could literally pick these properties up for about $100,000. These condos got up to be as much as $315,000. And now the HOA fees, the cost to insure these condos, is actually gone up so much that many people who bought them are really in trouble, as they're realizing that the overhead cost of owning these properties will be tremendously higher than what they originally expected. And keep in mind that at any moment another hurricane could hit Florida and another round of assessments for damages could come and make these people really be on edge. Other people are stuck litigating damages from past hurricanes. Sure, these companies have no problem overcharging customers now, but they're definitely struggling to pay up for the people from Hurricane Ian, many of whom along Southwest Florida still have not received payment for the damages. And if they have received a check, it's for a few $1,000s when they're facing $200,000 or $300,000 in damages. And that is the real situation right now. Not only are people having to insure these properties at as much as 500% more than what they were a few years ago, but if they do have a claim, chances are they're in for a long battle with insurance companies that have all types of excuses why not to pay. Many people are finding that even when they cancel their insurance companies, the insurance companies have the account set up for reoccurring charges as part of their contract, which means you have to battle them to get your money back as they continue to withdraw money from your account. They are automatically reoccurring fees that are set up through the contract, which means even if you try to cancel your coverage, they're still going to get their money out of you. They're charging you a premium for a coverage, but if you have a service that requires their attention, or if you're no longer interested, they're going to reoccurringly keep charging you for that service, whether you want it or not. And thus, this is a situation that people in Florida are finding themselves, where not only are they paying a lot of money for something, but they're getting absolutely nothing in return. In the case of others, they're being charged even when they don't need the coverage. All this because of that one condo in Miami that fell down. You guys remember that on the news? Well, that is the excuse that they have. Interestingly enough, Hurricane Ian wiped along the coast of Southwest Florida with a 9 to 14 foot storm surge, and the vast majority of those condos from the 70s and 80s are still standing without a problem. So it seems a little excessive now that the entire state of Florida is having all these laws and regulations regarding these condos, when in reality it was a single event, but they want to cash in on this as much as possible. If you're buying a condo or townhome in Florida, you better hope that it's a newer building that is up to the new building codes, because older buildings are going to continue to have assessments and they're going to have regulations, and many times the cost to bring these old condos up to the new expectations is dearly costly. The same thing can be about repairs, which usually lead to assessments. And that is the reason that many people in South Florida right now are finding that they can no longer afford their condos. We're seeing it from Dade County, Broward County, Palm Beach County, Lee County, Charlotte County, Sarasota County, mostly happening in the southern part of the state right now. This will most likely result in listing prices for condos having to fall and buyers not showing up for showings, these properties may become stagnant as people are aware that there's dangers involved with buying these types of properties that are being overcharged for insurance and HOAs, which are starting to become somewhat of a hustle. In theory, an HOA is there to ensure that the homeowners are able to have some type of security fund in case the community has any damages. There's a community working together to resolve these issues. But in reality, in the state of Florida, HOAs have become somewhat of a scam. And the worst part is, once you suspect that your HOA is misusing the funds, or they're overpaying to have things done around the property, or they're just having assessments that seem unreasonably expensive because there's a kickback scheme or anything else of that nature going on, defending your legal claim is almost impossible. Sure, you now establish that your HOA is doing something inappropriate. The legal process is a lengthy and expensive legal battle, many times a battle that isn't worth undertaking, which means that most people just bend over and let these companies scam them. And the way that these HOAs in Florida are set up, if you're having a complaint to voice, it's almost impossible for you to legally defend it. You have to play by their rules, and most people, when they realize the complications involved with trying to fight an HOA, they realize that their best option is simply to sell the property, and thus they're getting away with all types of misappropriation. Many people have even found a situation where they catch the person who's in charge of the HOA stealing, or they're able to prove that they were misusing the funds. Guess what? You don't have a legal claim, you don't have a criminal claim. If you're lucky, you can replace the HOA head or whoever's in charge of the HOA with somebody different, but it doesn't really change the fact that if somebody steals that money, there's not too many legal ways to go after them. There's even people who systematically exploit HOAs, knowing that no matter how criminal they become, how exorbitantly their prices get, or how obvious the fact they're misusing the money is, that there's no repercussions, because the way these HOAs are legally structured in the state of Florida, there's no way to persecute them, either from a legal perspective or from a criminal perspective. There's been a few rare exceptions on the news, but the vast majority of people who engage in this type of HOA scam know that the odds are on their part, that they're going to get away with basically anything they want to do because these HOAs are legally structured that way. In result, people are not even trying to fight. They're going to sell their properties, their condos. They're going to lose a crap load of money. They're going to pay these unfortunately high assessment fees that they're being charged and walk away taking a huge loss. Many of these people are people retiring in Florida. Their entire life savings are in their condos, horrible investments that they are now no longer able to keep as they've become so expensive to hold on to that they're better off taking the loss momentarily. But while the people who move to Florida are losing their investments, management companies and the insurance companies are lining their pockets at the expense of those people who are now stuck having to pay amounts of money that are literally unreasonable. There's even been cases in the state of Florida where lawyers themselves will go in, start buying up the units, and once they control enough units, then they're able to quite literally do whatever they want on these properties, and the remaining homeowners who don't sell out are now at the mercy of whatever amounts of money they want to spend, whatever assessments they want to take on, whatever regulations they make. They become the boss. And at that point, if anybody wants to sell their unit, the banks will no longer finance them. Once you get caught in one of these rackets, your only option will become finding a cash buyer for your unit, as once banks realize that one person is in charge of the whole thing, they're no longer interested in letting anybody buy the remaining units because they know they'll be at the mercy of those individuals. In these circumstances, they also set up a racket where they take people's deposit, their earnest money, and they lose it. This scam revolves around the idea that the person listing the unit knows that they are the majority of that association and that a bank won't finance it, but they'll still let you put a contract in with a bank behind it, knowing that that bank is most likely going to say no, but they'll get to keep your deposit. And they keep doing this in rotation to many people. So I would caution anybody that's making a contract on a small HOA that these are much riskier. If you're buying into a much larger HOA with hundreds, if not thousands of people, in those scenarios, it's a lot harder for somebody to pull off these schemes. But if you're buying into a very small HOA, chances are the people that already own those units could all work in conjunction with a lawyer to force you to sell your property. I was going to buy a condo in Fort Myers, Florida, and I talked to a neighbor who told me the situation they were in, and they warned me about buying the unit. It turns out that there's a lawyer who goes in and they buy up a percentage of those properties, and his partner will do the same thing, so it's two individuals who are in on it together. Once they own enough of those units, they practically become the majority of the HOA, and anything that happens in that community is up to them. So what then they actually start to do is that these two lawyers will have an internal conflict between each other as homeowners, except for everybody in that community is forced through the HOA to pay for the lawyer fees, which is actually two lawyers fighting against each other. So they're making you fight and pay for an imaginary legal battle. Let me just repeat that in case you didn't understand what I said. Two lawyers are both owning massive percentages of an HOA. They invested, they bought these units. Now, among themselves, they get into a legal dispute, but the HOA, all the other people in that community, have to pay to engage that legal battle, which consists of nothing more than two lawyers who are friends with each other that are engaged in some type of frivolous, fictitious legal dispute. But you, as a member of the HOA, now have to cough up the money for all their legal fees, and they do this endlessly to drain money from the other people who own those units so that those people will sell. But when they go to sell, they're no longer able to sell. The banks look at it and they say, hey, we're not touching this. And any realtor that comes in, when they disclose the information that's going on in the background, the buyers are going to back out. Many times they'll keep the earnest money if they set it up right. And thus, eventually, those other people in that HOA are forced to sell their unit back to the people who created the legal nightmare. And I think what's happening on a greater scale in the state of Florida is the same exact thing. I believe that these HOAs are doing the same thing on a larger scale. They're going to make it expensive and complicated to own these properties so that the people are forced either to sell it to somebody, an investor, because banks won't touch it, single investor, somebody buying these condos, they're going to be afraid to touch it, and thus, who will eventually end up owning these companies? The same people who made it unaffordable for you to have it are the ones who are going to either foreclose on the property or by default be able to buy it more affordably because nobody else is going to touch these properties. Guys, what they're doing right now in the state of Florida is that they are literally stealing properties from people legally. They're making it into a massive legal hurdle for you to own these properties. And in return, when you get frustrated and quit, you eventually give out, they get to keep your property because of the nightmare that they created. And that is what's happening in Florida on a massive scale. You know whose fault it is? You as an individual who thought you were an investor. You didn't have enough money to buy a house, so you bought a condo. You were already walking into the situation as a vulnerable party. In the state of Florida, the big fish eat the little fish, and the little fish schooled up to make a great meal for the big sharks. I think in the future, we're going to see these condos turn into apartment buildings with extraordinarily high rents, or they could get demolished and replaced with higher population density housing. Many of these old and decrepit buildings actually have golf courses, vast amounts of land in the heart of urbanized areas. Let's not forget that these old decrepit HOAs are usually in desirable areas. Take the city of Bradenton, Florida. They're putting up new houses on less than 5,000 square foot lots. They're literally jamming these properties up against each other all around Florida. Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, closer to the beaches, you have these expansive condo complexes with golf courses that nobody's using, old decrepit buildings closer to the beaches. Do you not think that they're eventually going to come after that land? That land where those old and decrepit condos lay is worth 10 times more if they're just able to get rid of you. They're in more attractive locations. These condos were built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and now they're building outskirts an hour away from the beach. But along the beach, you got all these old decrepit buildings that are just taking up space. It was just a matter of time before developers and builders came after these old decrepit condo associations. I've made videos about this in the past, and I think we're starting to see the infancy of the process that it will take for these developers to practically steal these properties from elderly people who couldn't afford anything else in the state of Florida. And they're going to do it by creating just a legal mess. They're going to make it so difficult for you to own these properties. The insurance rates are going to go up. The HOA fees are going to go up. The assessments are going to go up. And crap, if they can somehow create a hurricane, they'll do that as well. Anything in their power to destroy the state of Florida, maybe create homelessness, anything they can do. If it's malignant, if it's detrimental to the value of these properties, they're going to create the situation to force you out of that property. Did you know that Florida is the #1 state in America for litigation? 4% of Florida's, listen to this, 4% of Florida's gross product is litigation. That's as much as 2 times higher than the next state in line. That means that right now, roughly $1 in every $20 that is moving in the economy of Florida is in the hands of lawyers through litigations. And it might be even more than that. These are older analytics. So let's just assume that right now, out of every $20 moving in Florida, one of those dollars is in the hands of lawyers for litigation. Florida is the most legally frivolous state that exists. No other state even comes close. Imagine that in order to move $19 in the state of Florida, you have to designate one of them just for litigation. And that was before the mess we're in now. Who knows how bad it's going to get in Florida. If you think this is all happening circumstantially, you are a fool. This is by design. But let's continue to tell people in New York and California that they should come here to Florida to invest because we need more people to scam. You know what? I usually don't like these old people in Florida. Most of them are racist, they're unbearable, they're stupid, and I feel sympathetic for these people. I feel compassion for these people, what they're going through, because it's kind of a result of their own stupidity that led them to end up in this situation. And now many of them are going to have to leave the state of Florida. You know, sadly, these people are the ones who created the situation they're in. If you really dive deep into how the Florida state got like this, they're the ones who created the circumstances for this to happen to them, so they're victims of their own stupidity. But despite that, I don't believe, despite the fact that I don't like these old people, I don't believe that investors, developers, and lawyers should be allowed to steal an elderly person's home. And again, this is coming from the perspective of I don't even like the vast majority of these people that are in this circumstance, but at the same time, despite the fact that I don't like them, that doesn't matter. I believe that they have the right to these properties and that this shouldn't be happening to them. You know, people should have the right to live. They worked for it. They paid for it. They should have the right to live where they want to, despite whether I like them or not. You know, when SB 1718 came along and they ran 200, 300,000 Floridians away from their homes because of their legal status, these are the same old people who clapped their hands and were happy to see these people have to leave the state of Florida. Ironically now, who's next, you are. You know, you're kind of reaping what you sow. The evil that you wished upon other people is now happening to you. So in that case, it's kind of almost poetic justice in a sense that the same evil that you wished upon somebody else is now happening to you. But even then, I feel bad for the 300,000 people that left the state of Florida because of SB 17, and I feel bad for these elderly people that are now being forced out of their homes at the hands of whoever's behind this madness. And please believe that a percentage of it is malignant. My personal opinion is that these big developers and lawyers are purposely scheming to defraud these people out of their homes. But I've seen on a microscopic local level how lawyers and builders have been able to do the same exact thing on a smaller scale. These people blindly trusted in the state of Florida, the same state that's currently allowing them to have their properties legally stolen from them. It's really sad and pathetic. So let's go through the checklist. They got rid of the migrant workers. Now they got rid of the homeless people. And finally, now they're coming after the elderly people in condos. Clearly, anybody in Florida who isn't what they want here is an undesirable element. And whether legal or illegally, they're going about it however they feel with complete immunity to rid the state of Florida of what they consider to be undesirables. And sadly, a lot of these people supported all these measures. You know what's ironic? You're only going to realize it's wrong when you're the one that's next. When you're next, that's when it's going to be a problem to you. You're going to clap all the way through this process until you realize that you're next. And then it won't be funny anymore. The state of Florida has been systematically depriving people of their rights to work, to live. Look at the community of Cubans in Hialeah and Lehigh Acres. Did you know that as housing costs and everything increased in the entire country, the income of Cubans in the largest Cuban communities in Florida actually decreased? Yeah, while everything was going up, our incomes were going down. Places like Lehigh and Hialeah that are predominantly Cuban communities are being starved by the same people they're supporting. Interestingly enough, though, despite the fact everything got expensive, incomes were going in the other direction. Looking back to when it all started around 2015, 2016, I realized that the cost of living in South Florida was increasing, but what people wanted to pay you, especially if you were a Hispanic migrant worker or anybody who wasn't white, is that they expected you to work for less. Yes, when Donald Trump announced that he was going to have mass deportations before he took office, all the Latinos left South Florida that were illegal back then. From that point forward, all the Latinos that were legal and stayed behind, the customers started treating you like less. I felt it. I made videos about it. I talked about it on my YouTube channel in its infancy, and I left the state of Florida because I noticed, hey, these people here are now expecting me to work for less after massive deportations, even though I am a U.S. citizen. And that right there is the problem with Florida. They're coming after Cubans, then they came after illegals, then they came after the homeless people. They've just about killed off all the homeless people, and now they're going for the elderly people in condos. I'm pretty sure mobile homes will be next somehow. Anything that they think is undesirable, they want you out. And most people in Florida shear the whole process. Yeah, we got rid of them. Yeah, we got rid of them. But remember that tomorrow, when it's you that's being forced out of your home, it won't be too freaking funny. This brings back a lot of the feelings that I had when I left the state of Florida, that I felt like I was being forced out of my property by everything around me. I didn't want to leave my home, but I didn't have any options because of affordability. And I feel really sympathetic for anybody in the state of Florida who's left the state because they've had to, or in the process of thinking what they're going to do next because they're headed in the same direction. How long will we be forced to leave the state we're from? And again, it's funny when it happens to other people. You cheer it on when it's happening to others. But tomorrow, it's going to be you who's going to have to leave the state of Florida, whether you want to or not, because somebody else is forcing you out. That's the story of the state of Florida, and this is only one chapter of a freaking huge book of people who have had to leave the state of Florida, not because they wanted to, but because they were forced out. Take a look at Lehigh Acres. The average commute time for somebody in Lehigh Acres is as long as somebody who lives in New York City. They don't build roads for the poor people to get to work. They want to put all the poor people way the crap out in Lehigh Acres because the rich people don't even want to live near you if you're poor in Naples or along the beach in Fort Myers. 24% of the male population in Lehigh Acres, Florida is currently working in construction. What's going to happen when there's another slowdown? Do you know that most of the cities with the highest percentage of renters throughout the entire country are the communities that have the highest percentages of Cubans and highest percentages of Puerto Ricans? Also happen to be the communities that have the biggest percentage of renters. 15% of the females in Lehigh Acres, Florida are working in groundskeeping or house cleaning, the third highest of anywhere in the country. 18% of the females in Lehigh Acres, Florida work in restaurants, one of the highest percentages in the entire country. That means they depend on tips practically. Sure, they say Lehigh and Northport are among the fastest growing communities in the entire country, but let's not forget that the reason they built those houses in Lehigh is because the rich people in Naples didn't even want the poor people to live in the same county they do. Any Hispanic who stays along the beach where the rich people are faces constant police profiling like I did. You guys remember when I had Jose Likes Fishing, my fishing channel, where just about every single week I was dealing with 1 or 2 police officers. They profile the life out of you and they force you to have to move to Lehigh Acres, Florida. The rich people, they don't want to see poor people. They only want to see people like them living along the coast. Then these stupid idiots from New York start buying properties down here as investments, thinking that because, analytically there's a lot of growth in Lehigh. Yeah, the reason Lehigh Acres is growing is because they're forcing us out of Naples. They're forcing us out of Miami. Now they're forcing people out of Broward County too. Where are we going to go next? Who knows? There won't be anywhere else in Florida left for us to go soon. Sure, they tell you Lehigh Acres, Florida is one of the fastest growing communities in the United States, but what they don't tell you is why Lehigh Acres is one of the fastest growing communities in the United States is because they literally picked up all the Cubans in South Florida and threw them in Hialeah, threw them in Lehigh, left them no other options but to end up in these 2 dead-end places where instead of incomes going up, they're going down. But clap your hands and call it success and growth to dislocate these communities, to force people to end up in places like Lehigh Acres, where even though you live in the woods in the middle of nowhere, you got to commute as long as somebody living in New York City. Instead of having water, you have well water. Instead of have a sewer, you have a septic tank. And on top of that, you can't even get internet or a road paved in front of your house. That is what we're calling success in Florida.